When candidates say we wouldn't admit 3-year-old orphans, that's political posturing. When individuals say that we should have a religious test and that only Christians, proven Christians, should be admitted, that's offensive and contrary to American values.
Well, that was President Obama criticizing Republican presidential candidates for saying the U.S. should block Syrian refugees temporarily from entering the country because of security concerns. That did not sit well with Senator Ted Cruz.
It is utterly unbefitting of a president to be engaging in those kind of personal insults and attacks. And, you know, he talked about how he was belittling the Republican field as scared. Well, let me suggest something, Mr. President. If you want to insult me, you can do it overseas, you can do it in Turkey, you can do it in foreign countries. But I would encourage you, Mr. President, come back and insult me to my face. Let's have a debate on Syrian refugees right now.
Joining me now, Republican presidential candidate and Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Nice to have you on the program, Senator.
Thank you, Jenna. Great to be with you.
You know, politicians say a lot of different things. I know you know that better than anybody, but you were obviously very fired up about the president's comments. Why did they bother you so much?
Well, Jenna, look, it's remarkable this week that 2 days in a row, President Obama has chosen to attack me directly. 2 days ago in Turkey, he called me un-American. And then yesterday, what you just played in Manila, he called me offensive. And, you know, it's one thing to toss cheap insults, but instead of engaging in political warfare, how about the president do his job as commander-in-chief? He seems more upset that Republicans are calling for protecting this country than he is that ISIS terrorists murdered 129 people in Paris. Listen, ISIS has declared war on this country, and President Obama and Hillary Clinton's plan to bring tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees to this country, I think, is nothing short of lunacy. His very own FBI director told Congress they could not vet these Syrian Muslim refugees, that they lack the information. As he said we could query the databases till the cows come home, but we don't have the information as to which one of them are ISIS terrorists. And yet President Obama wants to bring people in knowing that ISIS is trying to embed terrorists to send them to America, to wage jihad and murder innocent Americans. And the president should be protecting this nation, not insulting you and me and millions of Americans, calling us un-American because we want to defend this nation, we want to keep our children safe.
Let me ask you for a little bit more clarity on something else that the president said. He made mention that some Republicans, and you were obviously in this group, wanted religious testing. And I've read different accounts on that about what you and others want. So I'd like you to clarify this for our viewers. Do you believe in religious testing for people coming into this country? I noticed you mentioned Syrian Muslim refugees when you were talking about the president and Hillary Clinton's plan. Do you see a difference between Muslim refugees and Christian refugees? Where do you stand on that?
Sure, Jenna. So I introduced legislation in the United States Senate that I brought up for a vote today in the Senate, and Democrats blocked it. And it was two different pieces of legislation. One focused on exactly the question you're asking, and it would have barred refugees from coming to America from countries where ISIS or al-Qaeda control significant amounts of territory. It would have focused on Syria and Iraq and Libya and Somalia and Yemen. And that is because we cannot determine who is a terrorist and who is not. And so it would have, for 3 years, blocked refugees from coming to America. Now, we can assist in resettling those refugees in the Middle East, in majority Muslim countries. And right now, America is already providing 10 times more money for resettling refugees than any other country on earth. So when the president postures about compassion, America is a compassionate country, but we shouldn't risk the safety and security of American citizens. Now, on the other hand, the Christians in the Middle East who are being persecuted are in a qualitatively different perspective. Number one, they're a small minority. Number two, ISIS is engaged with persecution and genocide against the Christians. They are crucifying Christians. They are beheading Christians. And, you know, the president says it's offensive to have any religious distinctions. You know, it's interesting. Existing federal immigration law says that a ground for refugees and asylum is religious persecution, and Christians are facing religious persecution. So the legislation I included has an exception for those facing genocide. ISIS is trying to exterminate the Christians. And what's astonishing, among the Syrian refugees who come to America, Do you know that only 3% have been Christians? Why does the president get so angry at those of us who want to help provide a safe haven for Christians being persecuted, but he's not angry at ISIS terrorists? He won't even call them radical Islamic terrorists. Instead, he defends them. I think that's really backwards.
So let me ask you to follow up on that regarding letting certain Christian refugees into the country. You just mentioned yourself that the FBI says, really, we can't do the background checks that we want to for this particular part of the world. So if you would like to offer more asylums to Christians who are facing genocide, how do you also background check them just to make sure that someone's not misleading us and getting into the country?
Well, the legislation I introduced calls for vigorous background checks. You know, if you look at it, there's no history of ISIS attempting to embed in the Christian community and pretending to be Christians for years back. And so the statute provides that if there are people who are subject to genocide, they have the burden of proof to prove by overwhelming evidence that they are indeed a member of that persecuted community and that they are facing a threat and they don't pose a terrorist threat. Of course, we should vet everyone. But nobody thinks that 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago ISIS terrorists were pretending to be Christians. They despise Christians. And here's what President Obama can't understand. There's a qualitative difference. The fact that he will not say radical Islamic terrorism, he doesn't acknowledge Hillary Clinton, the existence of Islamism. Islamism is a radical extreme view. It is a theocratic and political view that compels Islamists to jihad, to murder or forcibly convert anyone, any infidel, who they define as anyone that doesn't embrace their radical Islamist views. It is dangerous. And, you know, when I brought this up on the Senate floor...
There's some viewers, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are some viewers that really want your solution for that, of how we defeat that particular group that you're describing. But I want to finish up on this refugee issue really quickly, Senator. There are those that say, listen, that might be the debate that you want to have with the president about refugees, but that really isn't the debate we should be having, because several of the terrorists in France were actually French nationals. And if you're a French national, you can jump on a plane this morning and be in New York City by tonight and have very little oversight, and that's a more immediate threat than refugees that are waiting, you know, a year and a half, 3 years even, to come into this country. What's your plan for that? How do you see that threat, and what do we do about it?
Look, there's no doubt we need fundamental reforms to the visa waiver system, given the prevalence of radical Islamic terrorism in Europe. That is a serious concern. I introduced legislation and also brought it up on the Senate floor today, the Expatriate Terrorist Act, that focuses on one aspect of that, which is Americans, and there have been estimates that there have been upwards of 100 Americans that have gone to join ISIS. My legislation would say if you join ISIS, if you take up arms against America, you've forfeited your U.S. citizenship, so we won't be allowing ISIS terrorists to come into America with U.S. passports to wage jihad against innocent Americans. I brought that up on the Senate floor. The Democrats objected. And, you know, Jenna, it was very instructive, the argument Pat Leahy, the senator from Vermont, said. He said, gosh, my ancestors were Irish and Italian, and the very arguments you're using today would have blocked them. And I responded, I said, you know, it's interesting, Pat. My ancestors on my mother's side were and Italian as well, and they weren't coming to America pledging to wage jihad, pledging to to murder innocent Americans. My dad, when he fled Cuba as a refugee.
Well, I'm
there's
Irish
a real
and Italian
difference.
Too.
Jihad is different.
Maybe we're all related, Senator. We all have the same background, Irish and Italian. Let me switch to this topic. There are viewers that have a lot of questions for you. I want to get to one of them. And you're talking about where the bipartisan support is. That was one of our questions from Biro, who was on Twitter and said, can you please ask Senator Cruz what his plan is on getting anything done when he has almost no allies in Congress? And he wasn't speaking specifically about Democrats. He was also speaking about Republicans. How do you fix that if you're president of the United States?
Well, number one, in Congress, I have been leading the fight from day one. So, for example, when President Obama and Chuck Schumer and the establishment Republicans tried to push through a massive amnesty plan, I stood shoulder to shoulder with Jeff Sessions and Steve King, and we led the fight and defeated it. We won that fight in Congress over all the money and big business in Washington that wanted amnesty because they wanted cheap labor, which drives down wages. That's great for big business and lousy for working men and women. Likewise, when Barack Obama and Chuck Schumer joined together to push massive gun control, I led the fight protecting our Second Amendment right, and we defeated that.
So you feel you have friends in Congress? You feel like you have lawmakers that would be able to come to your aid, that you could lead and have others follow, even from the other side?
I can tell you every day I've been in the Senate, I have been leading the fight to defend our rights. And if I'm elected president, let me tell you how different things will be. So President Obama went to Europe and said that he doesn't have time for American leadership. He doesn't have time for America winning. What an astonishing thing that the president doesn't believe in America winning. I can tell you my philosophy is exactly the opposite. With regard to radical Islamic terrorism, my philosophy, to borrow a page from Ronald Reagan in the Cold War, is very simple. We win, they lose. Elected president, we will defeat radical Islamic terrorism, we will destroy ISIS, and we will secure the border. Enough talking. As president, I will build a wall that works. We will stop our southern border from being infiltrated by terrorists, and we'll solve the problem. That's what we need, is real leadership.
A lot of questions on national security from our viewers, and Dee Dee also had one. She realizes that the economy is key for our national security as well. And her specific question is, she wanted to know what specifically in your policies will benefit entrepreneurs and small business owners in the United States today.
Well, that's a terrific question from Dee Dee, because small businesses are the heart of our economy. 2/3 of all new jobs come from small businesses. I've introduced a simple flat tax. My tax plan, and by the way, if you want all the details, you can go to our website. It's tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org. All the numbers are there. But let me tell you how the tax plan would work, because it'll have a major impact on helping small businesses. For a typical family of four, the first $36,000 of income you earn, you pay nothing. Zero income taxes, zero payroll taxes. Above that, everybody pays a simple flat tax of 10%. It's even and it's fair. No longer do you have hedge fund billionaires paying a lower rate than their secretaries. On the business side, we get rid of the corporate income tax. We get rid of the payroll tax. We get rid of the death tax. We get rid of the Obamacare taxes. And we replace them with a simple business flat tax of 16%. Again, it's simple and fair. So you don't have giant corporations with armies of accountants paying little or no taxes while small businesses get hammered. Instead, everyone pays the same low, flat, fair tax rate. Now, what does
Senator,
that do?
I have to run, actually, because we're going to run into a commercial break. But I hope you come back to take more viewer questions, because there certainly was a lot of them, and we had a lot of news today to get to as well. But we look forward to having you back, Senator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenna. God bless.